The biggest mistake the living make that hurts the dead. According to Raymond Moody, if you have lost someone close to you, and since then speak to them in your thoughts every single day, return again and again to their image, replay the same scenes over and over in your mind, cry, beg them not to leave, and ask questions that will never be answered, stop. You may not even realize that right now you are doing the very thing that prevents them from moving on, not in a figurative sense, but literally. Raymond Moody did not come to this conclusion right away. At first, it was just one story. One of the most powerful cases he described came from a woman named Juan. Her aunt had been seriously ill for many years. Her relatives never left her side. They prayed, pleaded, begged God to keep her alive. In her final days, the woman stopped breathing several times. Each time, she was brought back. And one day, after regaining consciousness, she said something to her niece that the girl remembered for the rest of her life. "I was there, where I felt good. I wanted to stay, but your prayers are holding me here." After that, she asked for only one thing, that they stop praying for her return. The next day she died. It was at that moment that Moody first began to wonder, what if this was not an isolated case? When he began to organize and analyze similar stories, he felt he was no longer dealing with exceptions but with a pattern. It is important to understand who reached this conclusion. These words came from a man who cannot be called a mystic, a medium, or a charlatan. His name was Raymond Moody, a physician, philosopher, and researcher who was the first in the world to systematically study the experiences of people who returned after clinical death. He was not searching for sensations. He was not trying to prove the existence of heaven or hell. He simply listened to people who had died and then come back. And the longer he did this, the more often he heard the same confession from different people in different countries, regardless of culture, religion, or age. Almost all of them said the same thing. "I didn't want to come back. It was good there. But I was held back." And the most frightening part was that they were not held back by doctors, not by machines, not by a body clinging to life. They were held back by the living. For a long time, Moody refused to take this seriously. He understood how dangerous the idea itself sounded, because if it was true, then the most natural human response to the death of a loved one, inconsolable grief, might not help, but instead cause harm. But the number of coincidences became too great to ignore. People who had experienced clinical death described almost the same picture. First, separation from the body. Then, a sense of peace, silence, and complete absence of pain. A state many described as returning home. And then something strange happened. Emotions began to intrude into that state. Not their own. Someone else's. They did not hear voices and did not see faces. They felt pressure, heaviness, an obsessive pull from which there was no escape. Moody's patients said they felt the pain of the living as if it were directed straight at them, not in words, but as a sensation, as if they were being pulled back by invisible threads, and almost always the source was the same: a mother, a wife, children, those who could not accept and let go. Later, Raymond Moody would say that this was the most difficult discovery of his life, because it completely overturned the familiar understanding of love and grief. We are used to believing that suffering is proof of feeling, that pain is a form of loyalty, that if you do not cry and grieve, you are betraying the dead. But what if everything is the opposite? What if constant mourning becomes an anchor that holds a soul between worlds? We are used to thinking that thoughts disappear, that emotions are locked inside us, that they do not go beyond our own minds. But what if thoughts are signals? What if they do not dissolve but reach their destination? And if that signal is filled with pain, fear, and despair, it becomes a burden for the one who has already left the body. Moody wrote that this is precisely why some souls seem to get stuck, not here, but not there either. And if this is true, then the question is not whether life after death exists. The question is something else. What are we doing to those who have gone there? And most importantly, what happens to those who are not allowed to go for years? Why souls cannot leave, and whom they feel. When Raymond Moody began to speak openly about the influence of the living on the dead, the reaction was predictable. He was accused of speculation. They said he was playing on people's fears. His conclusions were called dangerous and even immoral. But Moody did not retreat. He continued listening to those who had returned from the other side, and with each passing year, the picture he saw became more disturbing, because almost all of these people described the same condition: incompleteness. After clinical death, consciousness does not vanish instantly. It does not dissolve. It retains sensitivity. People said that at first they felt release, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted from their shoulders. Pain disappeared, fear disappeared, even the sense of time disappeared. But then something emerged that shattered this state. Not images, not words, but emotions. Powerful, sharp, intrusive. As if I was being pulled back. As if someone was holding me by a thread. I felt that I was not being allowed to go. And the most important thing, almost always these sensations were connected to specific people. Moody noticed one detail that at first he himself considered accidental. Patients almost never said that they were being held back by a deceased relative. It was always the living, the one who suffered the most. The one who could not accept the loss, the one who kept calling again and again in their thoughts. And that was when Moody came to a conclusion he later called the most painful of his entire career. The greatest mistake of the living is not that they forget the dead. It is that they do not allow them to leave. We confuse love with attachment, memory with holding on, grief with loyalty. But according to Moody, grief that is too intense and too prolonged works like an anchor. The soul does not return to life, it becomes stuck. And it was precisely this that he connected to the strange phenomena people are afraid to speak about out loud: recurring dreams in which the deceased does not look joyful, but exhausted, a sense of presence in an empty house, an unexplained anxiety that comes without a reason, sudden emotional shifts as if someone nearby is suffering. Moody emphasized, this is not about ghosts or classical mysticism. This is not an attempt at contact. This is the consequence of a constant call. He wrote that the thoughts of the living act like a signal, like a summons, like an endless phone call that cannot be ignored. And if that call is filled with pain, fear, and despair, it causes suffering on both sides of the boundary. That is why Moody began to say something that shocked even his supporters. He claimed that true love after the death of a loved one is not holding on but changing one's inner state, not forgetting, not erasing the person from life, but stopping the pull backward. He said that between calm remembrance and desperate grief lies a vast chasm. The first allows the journey to be completed, the second makes it endless. And then he asked a question that made many people deeply uncomfortable. If we truly love those who have passed, why are we so afraid to let them go? But the hardest thing Moody heard came later, from people who had experienced clinical death more than once. And it was they who explained what happens to those who are not allowed to leave for years. Their words were far more terrifying. What happens to those who are not let go? The most disturbing testimonies Raymond Moody received did not come from those who experienced clinical death only once, but from people who returned more than once. It was they who spoke about what almost no one had dared to say out loud before. After the first experience, many of them felt that the transition had been interrupted, as if the door had already opened, and then was suddenly slammed shut. And when, for the second time, they found themselves there again, the sensations were completely different. Less peace, less light, more tension. One of Moody's patients said a phrase that he later quoted for many years. "I was not being held there, I was being held here." He felt that his path was delayed not by some higher power and not by his own will. He was being held by the people who remained alive. Their pain was felt not as an emotion, but as pressure, as weight, as a constant call. Moody noted that almost always these were the closest ones: a mother, a spouse, children, those who suffered the most and could not come to terms with the loss. From these accounts emerged a conclusion that was later called the most controversial and the most frightening of his career. Not all souls suffer after death. Those who suffer are the ones who are not let go. According to him, intense and prolonged grief creates a state of incompleteness. The soul finds itself between states. It is no longer here, but it cannot move on. It was precisely this that Moody connected to a phenomenon many prefer to remain silent about. A sense of presence, footsteps, quiet sounds, the feeling that someone is nearby, not because the dead want to return, but because they are constantly being called. Moody emphasized, most of the dead do not seek contact. They do not come to frighten. They do not demand attention. They do not seek recognition. They want to complete the transition. And then Moody said perhaps the harshest thing of his entire life. We hold the dead not for their sake. We hold them so that we do not have to remain alone with ourselves. We cry not only for those who have left, we cry for the emptiness, for the silence, for the fear of living on. And by doing this, he said, we cause pain not only to ourselves, but also to those we love. Moody did not call for forgetting. He did not call for abandoning memory. But he spoke of a different form of love, not a scream into the void, not a constant question of why, not a daily mental return, but a quiet admission. I remember you, and I let you go. He noted that when a person stops pulling a soul back, strange yet natural things begin to happen. Dreams change, the heaviness fades, the sense of presence disappears, the connection is not broken. It becomes calm. At the end of one of his lectures, Raymond Moody always said a phrase after which complete silence fell over the room. If you love those who have passed, do not keep them beside you. They are not here, and they should not be here. He did not deny life after death, but he warned, the boundary exists for a reason, and every time we try to erase it with our pain, both sides suffer. Perhaps that is why ancient cultures taught not only how to grieve, but also how to say goodbye. Because the greatest mistake of the living is believing that love is measured by pain. Sometimes true love is allowing someone to leave,